Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really immersing ourselves in something huge, something fundamental to how we live, trust. Now, most of us, I think, tend to treat trust as, well, maybe an emotion or something moral, something you earn or feel, like warmth or maybe security.
Yeah.
But what if that whole way of thinking about it, what if it misses something crucial, like the actual mechanism underneath? We're really trying to shift the perspective today, moving trust away from just feelings or ethics and putting it right into the world of perception.
That's it. That's a critical pivot we need to make. Our deep dive today is all about exploring the architecture of your awareness, how you actually experience reality. And we're using the insights from Gestalt psychology to do that. Really powerful stuff. Our mission, if you like, is to understand structurally why it's often so hard to see trust, even when it's right there being offered. The core idea we want you to grapple with is this. Trust isn't primarily something you build, like brick by brick. It's more like an event, something you have to allow yourself to perceive.
Okay, to really get a handle on that shift, let's use this image, this sort of dramatic scene from the material we looked at. Imagine you're standing in this huge, kind of silent, dimly lit gallery space, and you're searching for something vital that feels missing, this shape, this figure of trust. And then suddenly, there it is, lit by this single, maybe trembling beam of light. But it's not static, it's alive, it's fluid, always shifting at the edges. In 1 second, it looks like an open hand. The next may be a doorway that feels safe, or even a face you remember, have remembered, loved. It doesn't have this fixed, rigid shape. It's like pure possibility emerging.
And here's the twist, the paradox. You freeze. Instead of moving towards it, towards that light, towards that possibility, you find your breath catches. Your eyes are darting around looking for the exit. It's your body, your nervous system completely overriding your rational thoughts. Why? Because that response, it's protective, it's primal. The last time you got close to that figure, the last time you really let it fully form in your awareness, well, it didn't just fade, it shattered. And that shattering, it left a really deep wound, an existential cut.
Okay, I get the protective thing, I really do. But if there's always this potential for getting deeply wounded when we trust, why would we ever risk it? Isn't the mind just doing its job, keeping us safe from something that's clearly high stakes, potentially really harmful? I mean, isn't this whole idea just kind of encouraging us to get hurt again?
That's exactly the challenge, isn't it? And it really highlights the gap between our usual idea of trust, the moral one, and the perceptual reality. Trust, fundamentally, is a perceptual event. It either rises up, becomes a figure in the field of your consciousness, or it doesn't. It fails to rise. And past trauma, well, it teaches the organism that survival depends on avoiding it before it even fully appears. Preemptive avoidance. So it's not a conscious choice like, okay, I won't trust. It's more subtle. We actually train our perceptual field not to even register the figure properly. It gets suppressed almost automatically, out of this biological need for self-preservation. Let's unpack that using some core Gestalt ideas.
Okay, yeah. Let's start with the basics then.
Yeah.
Gestalt perception, the relationship between figure and ground.
Right. That's the absolute foundation of how we experience anything. Everything we perceive, everything that comes into focus is organized as a figure. That's the thing that emerges, gets sharp, demands our attention, and it's always set against the ground. The ground is everything else. The context, the atmosphere, the blurry background, the noise. The key thing here is that the mind isn't like a camera passively recording things. No, it's an active sculptor. It's constantly organizing reality, moment by moment, shaping it from raw sensation, memory, emotion, expectation. And what gets chosen to become figure, well, that's heavily influenced by the organism's deep drives, especially for safety and for things to make sense, for coherence.
Okay, so the figure gets the spotlight, the ground is the stage, the context. How does the mind decide which figures get that spotlight? Especially when a figure like trust seems to require, well, letting your guard down, which feels unsafe.
It relies heavily on the ground. The state of the ground is crucial. The mind is always trying to predict, right? To figure out what's coming next. And it uses the existing structure, the feel of the ground, to forecast the probability of survival. Let's take Lena, the example from our source material. She meets someone new, and this person is objectively kind. They're present, they remember little details, they listen properly, rationally, logically, everything about this interaction points towards, hey, this could be a safe connection.
Right, but Lena doesn't feel connection. She feels, static, unease, this kind of background tension, even though the person's being nice. And she pulls back.
Exactly. Her mind instantly translates his kindness. It sees it as a tactic, a calculated strategy. His patience isn't genuine patience. It's just patience waiting for the right moment to strike or take advantage or maybe just disappear. So her perception registers threat in disguise. It doesn't register trust.
Mm.
And this is the core problem we're digging into. The genuine figure of trust, the possibility of it, it just can't emerge clearly, even when it's right there being offered.
And you're saying the problem isn't really the figure itself, the potential trust, it's the environment it's trying to show up in. The ground is just too loud, too messy.
Precisely. The ground, in Lena's case, isn't a neutral backdrop. Oh no, it's saturated, it's cluttered, it's highly charged emotionally. The ground is made of these active echoes. We're talking about things like the father who promised he'd be there and wasn't, the ex-partner who twisted reality, who gaslit her, maybe the friend who smiled to her face but spread rumors behind her back, the boss who praised her publicly but undermined her privately. These aren't just static memories stored away in a file cabinet.
They're unfinished gestalts. That's the term.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. They are active structures. They're like ghost figures, hovering just below the surface of conscious awareness. Because they were never properly resolved, never fully processed or metabolized, they keep demanding completion. They're still buzzing with energy. And they are actively warping the present moment. They contaminate the ground. So when a new stimulus arrives, like genuine kindness, the field processes it through that contaminated, saturated ground, and the immediate result, perceptual distortion. The kindness gets twisted into threat.
So the nervous system learned its lesson perfectly from past pain. Trust, danger. And this learning now actively prevents the figure of trust from even forming properly. It's like a built-in defense mechanism.
It's absolutely trying to keep the organism safe, yes, based on past data. But here's where it gets incredibly tragic. The irony is profound. This very mechanism, which is designed so well to prevent that sharp, deep cut of betrayal, it actually causes a different kind of pain, a slower, maybe deeper, more existential ache. Because in successfully avoiding the possibility of future betrayal, we simultaneously shut down the conditions needed for deep, genuine connection now.
Wow. So we end up perceptually blind to real tenderness when it shows up, deaf to sincerity, numb to just simple, genuine presence. And we start mistaking hypervigilance, extreme caution for wisdom. We call detachment strength.
Meanwhile, the soul, or whatever you want to call that core part of us that needs connection, it starves. You end up feeling like a ghost in your own life, watching potential relationships, potential warmth unfold on the other side of some invisible glass barrier. You've built the perfect defense against being hurt again, yes, but the price is profound isolation in the present. The survival instinct, while effective for preventing acute pain, locks you into the chronic pain of loneliness.
That leads us directly into the more philosophical side of this, doesn't it? This perceptual block and the anxiety of freedom. I think we need to bring in Kierkegaard here.
We really do. Kierkegaard has this incredibly insightful line about anxiety being the dizziness of freedom. Think about that moment when you're faced with a real opportunity to choose trust, to step forward, be vulnerable, reach out. That moment holds immense freedom, right? But it often doesn't feel exhilarating. It feels like vertigo, dizziness. Why? Because choosing trust means consciously stepping into the unknown, without armor, without guarantees about the outcome.
And the part of the mind obsessed with survival, with control, just can't handle that lack of certainty.
Not at all. It screams a primal warning signal. Danger! Red alert! Remember last time you stepped into the unknown? Annihilation! Shut down this perception now. And so the mind floods the perceptual field. It brings in cynicism, overanalysis, overwhelming doubt, all designed to actively stop you from seeing the possibility clearly. It generates this thick perceptual fog to prevent you from taking that leap of faith.
Which brings us right back to that frozen lake metaphor you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's like we're standing on the shore, just replaying loops of every time we fell through the ice before, or heard stories about others drowning. Our perception gets locked onto seeing only the cracks, the thin spots. We don't see the solid patches. We don't notice the other people gliding along just fine. We're stuck perceiving inevitable disaster. So the figure of safe passage or shared movement, it just never forms for us.
And the crucial flip, the real insight here, is realizing that trust, as a perceived event, isn't defined by the absence of cracks. It's not waiting for a guarantee of perfect safety. Trust, from this Gestalt view, is the willingness to take the step, knowing full well the ice might break. This really overturns the conventional wisdom, doesn't it? The idea that trust has to be slowly built, validated by flawless, positive evidence, brick by brick.
Right, that's not how it works perceptually.
No. It's perceived, it emerges, or it fails to emerge based on how your perceptual field is fundamentally organized at that moment. And the hopeful part is, if you consciously choose to work with your attention, what you allow into figure, what you let recede into ground, the field itself can rearrange. Trust can then rise as an event, even with the history of past failures still present. Okay, let's go even deeper now, really nail down the details. We need to recognize that this blocking of trust, it's structural, it's built into the system. Trust won't just appear because you consciously want it to. Not if the field itself, your whole perceptual system, is structurally organized against it. And that organization, it comes from that deep organismic need for survival, for avoiding pain. That drive often overrides any philosophical longing we might have for connection.
So if the nervous system has essentially learned to map trust equals pain, then the whole field just organizes itself automatically, preconsciously, relentlessly to block that figure of trust before it can even fully emerge. The system's priority is preservation. It doesn't really wait for our rational permission.
Exactly. And we can actually dissect how the field does this blocking. This is like getting into the anatomy of the problem. There are, let's say, 5 critical mechanisms, all interwoven, that we really need to explore in detail, starting with the nature of the background itself.
Okay, mechanism 1. The ground is contaminated. We touched on the ghost figures, but let's get specific about how this contamination works, maybe using this idea of isomorphism.
Right. So the ground isn't just passive background noise. It's alive. It actively holds residues like unmetabolized emotions, things left unspoken, losses that weren't fully mourned. These aren't just history lessons, they're active structures. They're latent configurations of tension, like silt in a river that shapes the current without you always seeing the silt itself. Now, isomorphism. It basically means that the structure of your inner world, your inner field, tends to mirror and actively shape how you experience the outer world. So if your internal field is structurally organized around expecting danger or betrayal or abandonment, that underlying pattern will project itself onto new situations.
Can you give a concrete example? How does isomorphism play out in, say, a work situation?
Absolutely. Let's imagine a scenario. Your manager gives you some really positive, constructive feedback, and then offers you a significant promotion opportunity. Now, if your inner field is relatively healthy, organized around growth and potential, you perceive this as validation opportunity. Great. But if your inner field is structured by a past workplace betrayal, maybe an old boss praised you right before firing you unexpectedly, then isomorphism kicks in. That inner field, which is configured to expect sudden abandonment or attack after positive signs, processes the promotion differently. It's not seen as validation, it's perceived as a setup. You might hear the words, "We trust you with this promotion," but your contaminated ground, shaped by that past betrayal, translates it instantly into something like, "We're setting you up for a fall, so we'll look justified when we eventually get rid of you."
Wow. Okay, so the figure, the promotion, the trust isn't just slightly distorted, it's actually reorganized into its opposite. The field is literally creating the reality it already expects. It's prioritizing the familiar pattern of betrayal over this unfamiliar offer of safety.
Exactly that. The new kindness, the new opportunity lands as a threat because the field, structured as it is almost incapable of perceiving anything that fundamentally contradicts its core survival-based configuration of danger is imminent. Okay, let's move to mechanism 2. The figure cannot form without clear boundaries. Think about it visually. For any Gestalt figure to really pop out, to be clear and distinct, it needs a defined edge, a contour. It needs contrast against the background, right? Like a word clearly printed on a page.
Makes sense. So if the ground is soaked in fear, what happens to the edges, the boundaries of a potential trust figure?
They dissolve. Trust just bleeds into the surrounding noise. An act of sincerity, for instance, gets instantly contaminated by overanalysis. What's the hidden agenda here? What do they really want from me? Is this genuine? The boundaries of the present connection get blurred and overshadowed by anxieties about the future. How long until they leave? When will the disappointment come? The field becomes so saturated with this fearful interpretation that the figure of trust itself loses its definition. It never gets sharp enough, stable enough to be perceived clearly.
So we're not actually seeing the person or the offer in front of us clearly. We're seeing a projection of future risk.
You're essentially seeing a probability curve of potential pain. You take the offer of safety or kindness, and your field translates it into, this is the bait, this is how they soften me up before executing their real strategy. The figure of trust never solidifies because your mind is preemptively dissolving its boundaries with this corrosive mix of doubt and negative future prediction. Okay, the third mechanism is a really powerful one. Attention is hijacked by unfinished gestalts. We mentioned these earlier. The organism, your whole system, has this inherent drive towards completion, towards resolving tension. So an unresolved issue, a betrayal that was never talked through, an apology never given or received, a loss not fully grieved, it doesn't just fade away conveniently, no, it lingers. It persists as a kind of high-priority hotspot in your perceptual field.
And this is where we often get stuck, right? We think if we just push the memory down, ignore it, we'll be okay. But the organism itself keeps pushing for completion.
It absolutely does. That unresolved tension becomes like a dominant figure itself, demanding attention. It monopolizes your attentional resources. Think of it like an alarm bell that just keeps ringing softly or sometimes loudly in the background. Now, if your attention, your mental energy is constantly being pulled towards that demanding ghost of the incomplete past, there's simply no room, no bandwidth left to allow the more fragile figure of present connection or presence or even peace to emerge clearly.
Let's use that coffee shop anecdote again, maybe flesh it out a bit more with this mechanism in mind. You're sitting there having coffee and the person across from you says something simple and warm, like, I'm really glad we're doing this.
Right. But that simple sentence doesn't just land as a nice moment in the present. Not if there's a charged, unfinished Gestalt lurking. Instead, it triggers the high emotional charge of the past wound. Maybe those were the exact words your ex used right before they ghosted you, or perhaps it echoes something a critical parent used to say just before delivering a cutting remark. Instantly, your attentional field snaps away from the actual person sitting across from you and focuses instead on the spectral, urgent, demanding figure of that past trauma.
So the figure of this connection happening right here, right now, gets completely blocked. It can't emerge because the field is already occupied, saturated by the louder, more urgent, incomplete gestalt of betrayal or hurt from the past. You're physically there, but perceptually, you're locked in a different time.
Now, Mechanism 4, and this one is often deeply counterintuitive. The field prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar safety. This gets to the devastating principle of coherence. We have to grasp that the organism's primary drive isn't necessarily towards happiness or pleasure, as we might assume. It's fundamentally towards predictability. Why? Because predictability, even if it's painful predictability, feels like survival. If you grew up in an environment of chaos or neglect or repeated betrayals, your field, your whole system organizes itself around that level of tension and chaos as the known, reliable baseline of existence.
That just sounds backwards. Why would a state of hell be preferred just because it's predictable?
Because the nervous system interprets unfamiliar safety, unfamiliar calm, as an error signal. It's a deviation from the norm. Think about it. If your baseline emotional state is, say, an 8 out of 10 on the tension scale, and suddenly a situation presents itself that feels like a 2 out of 10 calm, your body doesn't register peace. It registers a radical deviation from the known operating state, and that deviation feels inherently destabilizing. Therefore, it's perceived as dangerous. The field actually resists this new safety quite fiercely sometimes. It might reject sincerity, translating it back into strategy, because the only way the system knows how to restore its familiar homeostasis to get back to that predictable 8-10 tension is to sabotage or reject the possibility of genuine connection and safety. It's an unconscious battle to return to the known hell because, paradoxically, that feels more controllable and more survivable.
The energy cost of constantly fighting that coherence principle, of always being on guard against safety, it must be enormous.
It's utterly exhausting. You're perpetually vigilant, scanning for threats, translating peace into potential danger, actively fighting off any evidence that contradicts your core, learned belief that the world is fundamentally unsafe, or that people will inevitably let you down. The moment you might start to relax or trust, the internal alarm bells go off. Warning, deviation from baseline detected. Adjust immediately. And often the system will unconsciously find a way to sabotage the connection just to get back to that familiar, predictable level of tension. And finally, let's look at mechanism 5. Insight is blocked by premature closure. We do this trying to protect ourselves, but structurally what we're doing is forcing the experience to end before it's actually had a chance to fully unfold.
We might call it analyzing the situation or being realistic, but you're saying it's actually forcing closure prematurely.
Yes. Instead of staying with the uncertainty, the ambiguity, the open-endedness of the relationship or the situation, we quickly slap a definitive, often defensive label on it. You know, the kind of labels, oh, he's just too good to be true, she's definitely manipulating me, this is never gonna last, or the classic, I know exactly how this story ends badly. This isn't cautious wisdom in action, it's more like an intellectual refusal to continue perceiving. It shuts down the process.
Okay, so by jumping to a conclusion, by naming the outcome before the experience is really complete, What specific information are we shutting ourselves off from?
We block the emergence of the crucial, often subtle details that could actually allow the field to naturally reorganize itself. The details that might contradict the old pattern. See, true, deep organismic insight, the kind that really shifts your whole perspective, your entire field, it doesn't come from quick analysis or slapping on labels based on the past. It comes from staying with the unfolding experience, staying in the ambiguity. It means bearing the discomfort, allowing the figure, the interaction, the feeling, the possibility to unfold fully and completely without rushing to judgment, without forcing an ending based on old scripts. Premature closure is the absolute enemy of insight because it locks you right back into the structural rigidity of your past patterns. It basically guarantees the ghosts win again.
So if all those attempts to work on trust often feel like hitting a wall, it's because we're usually focused on the wrong thing. We're trying to change the figure like I should trust this person when the real work needs to happen on the ground. That saturated, vibrating field has to somehow reorganize before the figure of trust can even have a chance to rise as a genuine, perceivable event. Gosh, that realization feels huge because it means that whole common idea that trust has to be perfectly earned or that a situation has to be made absolutely safe first that was just structurally flawed, perceptually wrong from the start. The foundation so many of us use to approach relationships might be fundamentally shaky.
It really does change everything, doesn't it? The core revelation, the big shift, is realizing that trust doesn't actually need perfect safety as a precondition. It doesn't need all past pain to be neatly resolved before it can appear. It appears when you choose to let it form danger and all, right now. You don't wait until you feel perfectly healed. You don't wait until the fear magically disappears. You allow the figure, the possibility of trust, to start taking shape now, right in the middle of the trembling, the uncertainty, the imperfect present moment. And you're not letting it form because you suddenly become fearless. You're doing it because you're choosing to be fully alive. And being fully alive, well, it inherently includes the risk of being wounded sometimes.
Okay, so that kind of structural reorganization means we're not trying to eliminate risk.
Yeah.
We're actually including it. Risk becomes part of the ground, maybe a known element, but it no longer automatically drowns out the figure of trust. We stop treating trust as this fragile thing that needs absolute protection from danger, and we start seeing it as something that emerges, well, in relationship with danger, coexisting with it.
Think about it this way. A muscle only gets stronger because it encounters resistance, right? Fire needs oxygen. It exists with oxygen, uses it. A tree develops resilience in its trunk precisely because it has to stand against the wind. Trust, perceived this way, functions similarly. It's not about finding a state of perfect stillness or safety. It's an experience of dynamism, of movement, of relationship with the complexities, including risk. The internal shift, then, is about stopping that absolute demand for external guarantees, for certainty, and starting to accept the ambiguity.
Okay, that sounds good conceptually, but practically feels almost impossible when your nervous system is screaming, danger, annihilation imminent. Based on past experience, how do you actually make that shift in the moment? How do you override that primal alarm?
This is where we have to stop waiting for the external world to change first. Think about how much time we can spend metaphorically standing at the edge of that cliff, wanting desperately to leap into connection, but utterly terrified of falling. We do all the prep work, the mental calculations, the research, analyzing the other person, waiting for that absolutely perfect moment, the calm water below, the still wind, the complete and total absence of fear. But that perfect moment, that guarantee of absolute safety, it never actually arrives, does it?
No, it doesn't. So the decisive action, the shift, has to be internal then.
Exactly. You stop waiting for safety to be handed to you on a platter. Instead, you consciously lean into the fear. You allow it to be there, to pulse, to exist, acknowledge its presence. And you choose to step forward anyway, not because you're suddenly certain you won't fall or get hurt, but because you become willing to fall, willing to risk the hurt for the possibility of connection. And in that moment of choosing to step despite the fear, the figure of trust appears. But it doesn't look like armor plating or a shield. It appears as this dynamic contour, a shape that's actually woven with the anxiety, intertwined with the fear. Perception doesn't eliminate the tension, it reorganizes it, holds it differently.
And that act of stepping forward, that courage, it connects right back to the philosophical depth we touched on. It reminds me of Kierkegaard again, that idea that life has to be lived forwards, even though we can only really understand it looking backwards. You can't just hold your breath and wait until the past is perfectly resolved before you decide to fully show up in your present life.
Yeah.
You have to live it now, right in the middle of the ambiguity.
And chemists too, right? Thinking about Sisyphus, maybe imagining Sisyphus happy. It teaches us that trust, in this sense, is about the gesture itself, not just the guaranteed outcome. It's about the willingness to reach out your hand, even knowing, fully knowing, that the other hand might pull away. It's about speaking the truth that's in your heart, even if those words might be misunderstood or rejected. This is what we mean by creative perception. You are actively co-creating your experienced reality by what you choose to allow into figure, what you consciously attend to, and how you learn to hold the complexities of the ground.
So if we think of ourselves as the artist of our own perceptual field, then when we make that choice consciously, maybe tremblingly, to let trust become figure, even while that background hum of fear is still loud in the ground, we're actually making a profound statement, aren't we? We're reorganizing our own internal world. We're saying, in effect, I am more than just the sum total of my past wounds.
And we have to discard those old metaphors. Forget impenetrable walls, heavy armor, rigid shields. That's about blockage. Instead, we need to think in terms of contours. Boundaries, yes, but boundaries that can breathe, that can flex, that allow for input and output, for exchange. Trust, seen this way, is a temporary, dynamic, sometimes beautiful shape that emerges in the field. It doesn't need to be permanent or unbreakable. It just needs to be allowed to form, to exist for its moment. And when it completes its natural cycle, maybe a moment of connection fades, maybe a vulnerability is met with rejection. You don't necessarily have to frame it as catastrophic failure. Maybe you frame it as completion of that particular gestalt. You absorb the information, the learning, and you allow the field to reorganize itself, ready for the next moment of possibility.
Okay, this really brings us to the practical takeaway then. If the goal isn't about fixing the past or even necessarily forgiving everything right now, what is the path forward? You use the word staying. That feels like the core practice, a kind of radical perceptual discipline.
Staying, yes. It means actively refusing to obey the impulse to withdraw when it arises. It means choosing to stay with the discomfort, stay with the ambiguity of the situation, the not knowing, stay with the actual person right there in front of you. And this is so vital without constantly translating them into the ghosts of people from your past. Stay with that raw, intense feeling of vulnerability without immediately rushing to put the armor back on. Stay with the impulse to run, or maybe the impulse to lash out defensively, but consciously choose not to obey it in that instant. This kind of sustained presence, this deliberate perceptual discipline, over time, it allows the ground to soften slightly. It starts to starve those old, dominant ghost figures of the constant attentional energy they need to control the field. And that creates just enough space for the figure of trust, fragile, maybe trembling, but entirely alive to begin to emerge.
Which leads us, I think, to the final insight, maybe the most unsettling one, but also the most profound. The idea that being wounded isn't actually the opposite of trust. In a really challenging way, it's evidence.
Exactly. The scar you carry, it's not necessarily a map of your failures, it's a record. It's proof of participation. Think about it. You can't be wounded if you never risked reaching out. You can't be betrayed if you never allowed someone or something to matter deeply to you. So the scar is also a record of where you dared to connect, where you dared to reach. The goal, then, isn't to somehow engineer a life completely free of pain that's impossible and probably undesirable. The goal is to protect your core capacity to feel, to perceive, to allow figures like trust and connection to emerge at all. A life lived purely in defense, avoiding all potential wounds, becomes a kind of half-life, observed from a distance perhaps, but never fully participated in, and arguably we were built to engage, not just to avoid.
That engagement, that participation, it means accepting that life inevitably includes falling sometimes, failing, and yes, sometimes getting profoundly hurt. Maybe that's the price of admission to a full, connected human life. And the critical realization from today is that you can't wait until the field is perfectly clean, perfectly safe, before you start. Because there is no until. There's only now, right now, in the inherent messiness of the present moment.
And every single time you make that conscious choice, however small, to let the figure of trust form, even with the fear right there alongside it, you are actively, physically rewiring your perceptual field. You're teaching your organism incrementally, moment by moment, a new truth. Risk is not necessarily annihilation. Risk is participation. And this slowly shifts trust from being some distant, abstract ideal that feels impossible into a recurring, possible event in your actual experience, an event that rises not despite the fear, but with it, transforming the very structure of your awareness over time.
So maybe the final provocative thought for everyone listening is this. What if the real challenging work isn't primarily about learning how to perfectly avoid ever being wounded again? But maybe it's about learning how to be wounded, how to metabolize the hurt, integrate the experience, and still, fundamentally, choose to see the possibility of trust again.
What if that figure of trust doesn't actually need you to be fearless? What if it just needs you to be faithful? Faithful to the act of perceiving itself, faithful to the gesture of reaching out, faithful to the courage of simply allowing things to form, even when it feels risky. What if trust is ultimately just the raw recognition of aliveness itself, accepted in all its fragile, dynamic, and, yes, potentially dangerous beauty?
The field is yours. Your attention is yours. And that choice, terrifying, maybe, beautiful, certainly, and utterly alive, is yours. Let the figure form, even now, especially now, fear and all.